How's it going, YouTube? Got FourthStarTCG here, and today I am going to demystify the PSA population report for you, and really for any grading company. Now, oftentimes I see people throwing around the phrase low pop or low population, or basing their buying decisions off of the population report, saying, oh, this card has a lot of PSA 10s, it's probably going to go down in value. Or there's so many PSA 10s of this card, it's never going to maintain a high price. So I think a lot of these buying decisions and a lot of the approaches to the PSA population report are a little misguided. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you through all the different variations of so-called low pop and all the different reasons why a card might have a certain number in the population report. And hopefully at the end of this video, I'll have a better understanding of why the population report is what it is and what tools we can, what we can use it for. So let's start off with the phrase low pop. Now this gets thrown around a lot, where usually in terms of when someone wants to sell their card and it's a low population, they'll say, oh, low pop. Someone wants to advertise a card, it's a low pop, there's not many out there in a 10. Now, what I want to sort of refocus the population report. When we say low pop, I don't want you to think of low population, I want you to think of low popularity, because normally that is the case. The population report is not necessarily a reflection of how difficult a card is to grade. In some cases it is, but in many cases it's not. In most cases, the population report is a reflection of popularity. So, for example, I have my trusty Ariados Holo from Golden Sky Silvery Ocean. This card is a PSA 10. Now, very nice card, beautiful Mitsuhiro Arita artwork. I love this card. Most people do not. The PSA population for this card is 28. There are only 28 copies of this Ariados in a 10 in existence. If I was trying to sell this card, I would say this is a super low pop card, you know, super difficult to find, only 28 10s in existence, right? That's super low compared with so many other cards that we see today. However, this Ariados sells for, I have it in my notes here, $60 to $80. Not that much in the grand scheme of things. The reason being is that Ariados is not a super popular Pokemon. Old Japanese EX0 Holos is not a super popular class of cards. There are probably a bunch of these in mint condition that are out there sitting around waiting to be graded, but it's just not worth it for people to grade. And even if it was, Ariados is probably not going to sell for all that much to begin with. So, low population in this case means low popularity, right? This card isn't a Pop 28 because it's super difficult to grade, or, it's, the rarest card that's super hard to find. It's a set card. It's a Japanese set card. Japanese EX year printed less than a lot of other eras, but it's still a set card, right? So, just because this Ariados is low pop doesn't mean it should be expensive. And in fact, it isn't, because Ariados, low popularity. Low population equals low popularity. Now, we can also think of the opposite, a card with a really high population that is super high popularity, and that's usually what the population report shows. Got my PSA 10 Van Gogh Pikachu here. This, one of the most popular Pokemon cards out there right now. And the PSA population report reflects this, or as we should say, the PSA popularity report. 42,400 PSA 10s of Van Gogh Pikachu. Pikachu with gray felt hat. Now, the Ariados with Pop 28 was selling for $60 to $80, but this Pikachu with 42,400 PSA 10s is selling for $1,250 roundabout. I just sold one for that. I sold two for $1,200, just sold one for $1,250. So it even looks like the card's still going up in value recently. Pretty insane. Now, again, why do we have 42,400 10s of this card, it's because this card is so popular. Everyone wants it, and that's why it's selling for a ton of money, even when there's tens of thousands of PSA 10s. Or I think it might be the most graded PSA 10 card ever. But it's still selling for that much money because the popularity and the demand is so high. So I usually see a lot of people, they say, oh, well, you know, there's 42.4 thousand PSA 10s of Van Gogh Pikachu, you know, it's going to come down in price. Not necessarily. As we were seeing, it's still going up. It's gone up from, you know, $700, $800 in a 10 several months ago. Now it's up $450 to $1,250. And it seems to just keep going up from there. And this card has a lot of fundamentals going for it. You know, Pikachu, artist collaboration, unique artwork, all that kind of stuff that tends to make Pokemon cards popular. So, what the population report means in this case is that everyone wants this card. Everyone's grading this card. And the demand, especially for graded high-grade copies, is so significant that it's able to sustain even at a 42,000 plus PSA 10 level. Personally, I would consider that to be a very good sign for the card's long-term health if there's that much demand. Of course, there is much more risk inherent in that calculation. With 42,000 10s, there's always going to be supply. We're never going to run out of supply for Van Gogh 10s. There's always going to be one on eBay. It's not going to be a difficult card to find. If you have the money, you're going to be able to buy it. That's just the fact of this of the population report. So that is what I would consider to be the main thrust of the population report for the most cards. If it's low pop, it means that people just aren't that interested in it. If it's high population, people are really interested in it. It's a good card. People like it. So keep that in mind when you're buying cards. Don't necessarily go for the low pop cards just because it's low pop. Chances are people don't want that card as much as a card that's been graded more. But there are some situations in which low pop or low population actually means that the card is difficult to grade and difficult to find in that condition. So let's start off with sort of the most quintessential low pop cards of all time, the trophy cards, right? Trophy cards are low population, not necessarily as a function of popularity, right? People want trophy cards, but they're low pop because there are so few of them printed. In that case, you don't really want to go by a population report on PSA or something like that. That doesn't really tell you much. It's not going to tell you much about the price, not going to tell you much about the future direction or the demand for the card, just because there are so few to begin with. The other case where low population can really mean difficulty to grade or difficulty to obtain is stuff like black and white era full art cards. So I've got a couple here. I've got my Rayquaza PSA 10 English, and I've got my Entei PSA 10 English. Both of these cards are very low population. The Rayquaza has 13 10s, and the Entei has 10 PSA 10s in existence. So, for a card that was released, 12 years ago, to only have double-digit 10s, and just double-digit 10s in that regard, that tells you something about how difficult the card is to grade, especially when you consider that Rayquaza has 135 PSA 9s in the population report and 181 PSA 8s in the population report. So normally with most cards, you've got a clustering at the 10 level, and then it sort of drops off through the lower grades. Maybe for some other cards, you're 50-50, 9 and 10, or maybe 60-40, 9, 10, maybe 70-30, that kind of stuff. And then it trails down to the lower grades. The black and white full arts, you've got the lower down in grade you go, towards 8 and 7, so to speak, not necessarily down into the much lower grades. You've got more cards. So that tells you that there are more cards out there in lesser condition of these copies and much fewer in the higher grades. There are much fewer gem mint Rayquazas than there are near mint to mint and mint copies. And if you were around during black and white, you know that pulling a card out of a pack in no way guaranteed you a PSA 10. Many people pulled black and white full arts out of the pack that grade PSA 7, just fresh out of the pack. The card condition was that bad. So in this case, the population report is actually reflecting something inherent about card quality, about how difficult it is to grade these cards. And that is the situation, right? That situation is really the only one where I would consider low pop or low population to mean something sort of useful about the card, paying more for the card because it's low population. You really only want to do that in the case where the card is hard to grade, right? And it's also likely, and these cards are expensive. Rayquaza, there hasn't been a sale. One hasn't popped up on eBay, at least to my knowledge, one hasn't sold privately. I'd estimate the value to be somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 for a 10, but we don't know. And that's another thing about these cards, is that when they're so low pop, you don't get sales all that often. You can't go out and buy one on eBay like you do with a Van Gogh 10. There aren't hundreds of copies for sale at any one time. All right, so what have we learned? First, low population doesn't necessarily mean hard to find. Often low population or population in general is a reflection of the card's popularity and not anything inherent about the card quality or card distribution or card properties. Right? Our Ariados, super low pop, but nobody wants it, right? That's why it's low pop. The Van Gogh, super high pop because it's so popular. You don't want to buy a card just because it's low pop. Just because a card is low pop doesn't mean it can or should be expensive. There are some cases where low population actually means something, right? If you're talking about cards that are low population by default, like trophy cards. And really the only case where low population has an impact on the value of the card is, at least in my opinion, should have an impact on the value of the card, is when the card is very difficult to grade, and that is borne out by the rest of the pop report, right? So if a card is low pop and you look in the pop report and it's got a ton of 9s, a ton of 8s, a ton of lower grades, that reflects something inherent about the card quality and the production value at the time. So if you want that 10, paying a premium, you're probably going to have to do it. It's going to be difficult to get that card. They're not going to come up all that often. And that is the one case in which low population might actually add something to the value of a card. So that's going to do it for today's video. I hope this demystified the population report a little bit for you. If you're interested, for example, in this Van Gogh PSA 10, it's up on my eBay now. If you're interested, you can shoot me an offer there or message me on Instagram. Again, I'm not looking to sell this card for anything below market value, but if you're interested, let me know. So thank you all very much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and stick around for more videos.